Some people don't fail because they can't succeed. They fail because at some point they stop trying. Not suddenly, not consciously, but gradually, after enough moments where effort stopped making a difference. And once that shift happens, something very specific changes in how they respond to life. Psychologists call this learned helplessness. It doesn't look dramatic. It looks like hesitation. Opportunities appear, but they are not acted on. Problems show up, but they are not challenged. Not because solutions don't exist, but because something internally says it probably won't change anything. They still think, they still notice, they still understand what could be done, but action feels unnecessary, almost pointless. This pattern doesn't begin with laziness, it begins with repeated experiences, situations where efforts didn't lead to improvement, trying and failing, speaking and not being heard, acting and nothing changes. Once, that's normal. Twice, still manageable. But repeated enough times, the brain starts detecting a pattern. Effort is equal to no result, and the system begins to adapt. The brain is built to conserve energy. It constantly asks, is this worth doing? If effort consistently leads to no reward, the answer becomes no. So instead of pushing harder, it starts reducing effort, not out of weakness but efficiency. Why waste energy on something that hasn't worked before? At a certain point, something subtle changes. It is no longer about the situation, it becomes about expectation. Even when conditions improve, the response stays the same. Opportunities are ignored, possibilities are dismissed early, actions are not taken. Not because they wouldn't work, but because the system has already decided this doesn't work. This is where it becomes difficult to notice, because from the outside it looks like passivity, but internally it feels logical. It feels like, I've seen this before, I know how this ends, there is no point. And because the conclusion feels rational, it doesn't get questioned. Every time action is avoided, something important happens. Nothing changes. And that nothing becomes confirmation. See, it wouldn't have worked anyway. So the belief strengthens not through failure this time, but through inaction. And now the system is self-sustaining. The cost isn't immediate. Life continues, things stay stable. But growth slows down. Possibilities shrink, not because they disappeared, but because they are no longer explored. Over time, this creates a life that feels limited, without a clear reason why. This pattern is not about ability, it's about conditioning. The brain learned something from past experiences and kept applying it, even when it stopped being true. What once was adaptation becomes limitation. Change doesn't begin with motivation, it begins with interruption. Small actions taken in situations where the brain expects no result. Not big risks, just small breaks in the pattern. Action, observe outcome, update expectation. Because the system only updates when it sees new evidence. And without new evidence, it keeps repeating the old conclusion. So some people don't stop trying because they are weak. They stop trying because they've learned that trying doesn't work. And once that belief is learned, it doesn't need to be true anymore. It just needs to feel familiar.